Hello, my name is Tim Galema, and I'm the motorsports lead for the Dana Aftermarket. Welcome to the Spicer Garage.
Hello, my name is Paul Moreau, and I'm an engineer with Dana's Aftermarket team.
Today we're going to take apart a Jeep and replace the axle shaft, and we'll show you why you need to change the entire assembly rather than change individual components. The reason we're changing the shaft in this particular Jeep, as a matter of fact, both sides, is after 100,000 miles, the seals have begun to wear. As you notice, there's buildup on the brake backing plate. So in an effort to keep control of the leak, we're changing the entire axle assembly as you see it here.
The axle shaft assembly consists of a finished axle shaft with wheel studs pressed in, an ABS tone ring pressed onto the shaft, a retainer plate, the oil seal, a bearing assembly, and a retainer ring. Under no circumstances should individuals attempt to perform any repair or maintenance procedure for which they have not been properly trained or lack the proper tools and equipment for the repair. Always wear the proper safety glasses that meet OSHA requirements when performing maintenance or service. Failure to wear safety glasses can result in personal injury and/or partial or complete vision loss. Always be careful when handling gears or other sharp components. Always be sure to follow proper torque specifications carefully. Failure to do so may lead to premature component failure or damage to other vehicle components.
Today in the Spicer Garage, we are going to take on an axle shaft replacement. We are going to replace them today with the Spicer axle kits. They contain bearings, seals, and also the replacement shaft. It's a much easier repair that requires far less tools. All you'll need special beyond the standard hand tools is a slide hammer to pull the axle shaft out of the axle tube. So after the tire gets removed, the next step is to remove the brake caliper. Now certainly I have loosened all this already, so it's much easier than it would be. The brake caliper merely slides off the rotor and you lay it off to the side. Next, the rotor should come off pretty easily. It may get stopped on the end of the axle flange, but more often than not, a quick tap with the hammer should get it off. And now we're going to go back to the axle flange. There's 4 small nuts that hold this flange assembly on before you can pull the axle out. Next up, once the flange is firmly attached onto the axle flange, a couple of slides of the hammer. And in this particular case, I can see it moving already. Then all you need to do is disconnect the slide hammer and pull the axle out of the axle tube. And I will freely admit this is much easier to do on a lift than it would be on your garage floor, but the end result is the same. Once it's loose, you need to be aware of a couple of things. You're going to own an axle shaft in your hand that's probably 2.5 to 3 feet long, and you're going to be susceptible to all the oil that's inside that axle tube is going to drip out. So be prepared with a small bucket or something to catch everything that falls, and a rag so that you kind of maintain the mess and it doesn't get everywhere. Okay, we're about to remove the axle shaft. Again, remember, the axle tube has oil in it, so you need to be aware. You're going to have to catch some. I'm pulling it out of the side gear in the differential. And out it comes. You'll see the splines, and the axle shaft is in your hand. Now that the shaft has been removed, if I wasn't changing the entire assembly for this seal, I would have needed to remove the retaining ring and the bearing before I had access to the seal that needed to be replaced. You would have to find a machine shop capable of doing that and replace them back in the right location. So the assembly offers you a factory installation of all of those very critical components.
You will notice on the new axle shaft assembly that the bearing cup is installed onto the bearing cone and cannot be separated. Most of the time when you remove your axle shaft from the vehicle, you'll notice that the bearing cup separates, making reinstallation back into the vehicle much more difficult. That's one reason why we recommend a new shaft assembly.
Remember to check the axle bore before you install the axle to be sure there are no nicks or scratches. Okay, I've already looked to be sure that the axle shaft is an identical match of the shaft I've taken out, because on different vehicles the axle shafts might be different lengths. Okay, the splines are engaged with the side gear of the differential, and now I'm ensuring that the holes are lined up for the flange. Carefully slide the shaft in with holes aligned. The bearing should push into the bore, and all I got to do is tighten the bolts. Axle is engaged in the side gear. Flange plate is pushed through the brake backing plate, and I now can install the nuts to firmly hold the axle into the axle tube. Just to make the installation easy, I've wiped a small amount of grease on the axle flange, so when the brake rotor goes on over the studs, it will slide freely over and seat on the flange. Okay, once the rotor is firmly back up on the axle flange, you have to slide the caliper over the rotor and reinstall. You've ensured that everything is in the right position. Torque everything back to the factory specification and reinstall the wheel and tire. You should be ready for another 100,000 miles.